when you see how wonderful things are interconnected, then you can appreciate the here and now. You can appreciate the moment for what it is. When we can see that bigger picture, all of a sudden, no matter what happens in our lives, we can shift our own perspective on what that means.
If you're not conscious about your investment strategy, you won't end up where you want to be, not financially or as a human. On this show, we interview highly successful investors and share how they overcame limitations to become unstoppable forces of success. If you're ready to learn what it is to be a conscious investor so you can end up where you want, keep listening.
Conscious investors, welcome back. This is a first, and I am absolutely excited to have podcast space. You know, you've heard me talking about Real Estate Wealth Builders Conference for the last few months. And Dustin Heiner, the founder of the event, he's actually been on the podcast multiple times. And recently you heard us discussing the upcoming conference and just the value of networking in person. And so we had this opportunity to actually record a live podcast with all the super fancy equipment. And my friend Michael is joining me. He's a fellow podcaster, but this is also the power, just to, case in point of what Dustin and I were discussing is when you go to a conference and you meet people in person, you're actually able to connect on such a meaningful level. And last night, Michael and I were able to have dinner. Steve was there and his podcasting partner, Marlon, was there. It was this beautiful dinner, beautiful conversation that was one of those next level conversations. Conscious investor, you know what I'm talking about. And so I said, hey, you know what, Michael, can we record a podcast in person at this fancy desk, area? And I just want to say thank you so much for saying yes and coming down and venturing down the rabbit hole with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie. This is just going to be fantastic. It was such a blessing to meet you last night at dinner. And oh my gosh, we have so much in common. So I'm super excited just to have this conversation with you today. I know it's going to be riveting. And Conscious Investor, I'm not going to, we're going to dive into the meat and potatoes of purpose. And that's something that so many of you have come to me and let me know, hey, purpose, how do I find my purpose? What is purpose? What is the purpose of wealth? Purpose is such this ginormous word. And what's interesting is that you and Marlon have this fantastic podcast. I listened to an episode as I was getting ready this morning before coming down to the event. And I was just blown away at how similar our philosophies, our ethos are. Can you just dive into a little bit about your podcast? Because Conscious Investor, you're going to want to go head over, and I'm going to butcher the name because I know I'm millionaire, but can you just share about that so they know exactly where to go? Yeah, absolutely. So the name of our podcast is called Breakthrough Millionaire. And so Marlon and I actually met at a Tony Robbins event, and Marlon is a professional, internationally renowned speaker, and he actually has been running Tony Robbins Foundation's GYLS conference, and GYLS stands for the Global Youth Leadership Summit. And so he's the main facilitator. He's been doing this for 23 years. And so I was actually there one year just as a volunteer. And one of the people that knows him knew me, and he just ended up connecting us. I actually volunteered 5 years in a row. I never met Marlon, actually. And so he's up on the stage, he's rocking the house, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'm going to let the kids engage with him because he's very popular there. And it's for me, part of my, I guess, limiting beliefs at the time was that he doesn't want to talk to me. I'm no one, right? And so what happened, there was life, universe, God, however you want to describe it, put us in connection. And we hit it off. We had very common, similar goals and values about how to help people with their money and build wealth on multiple levels, right? So money's just part of it, but relationships, purpose, spirituality, health, all of them go together. And so we decided to create a podcast, and that's where Breakthrough Millionaire came from.
Conscious Investor, you want to go check out Breakthrough Millionaire and then leave an honest rating and review. You've heard me say it before. That's how we show love and support every podcast. So if you haven't done that for this podcast, please make sure you do that. But definitely head over to Breakthrough Millionaire when you're done listening to this episode. So let's talk about purpose. And I have so many questions now about how you guys met and your experience with Tony Robbins, but I'm going to show some level of self-control here and not go on that, rabbit trail. But, how did you find purpose? What does that mean? How would you clarify or define that for yourself? And how has that evolved and changed over your lifetime?
That's such a fantastic question. And I think you really hit the keynote. it evolves. And so even where I'm at in my present day life, it's still evolving. And so I'll just kind of share quickly. When I was very young, I was very blessed because I had a couple of uncles who were very well-to-do. So a rich dad, poor dad type of scenario. And I was very fortunate to see that my uncles didn't have to work a normal 9-to-5 job. They actually had purchased a lot of real estate. They had built companies, and they didn't have to, do what most people did, including my parents. They were going to work. And I was like, how come they get to hang out with their family and go on vacations all the time and do whatever they want? And I was like, I want that. So I really started asking them questions. I took it upon myself to self-study and learn about personal finance. And I really knew that I wanted to build a company. So just out of college, I was exiting school right around the dot-com boom. So this is right when the dot-coms were like crazy. Everyone was throwing money at Amazon and eBay, and all these companies were really, taking off. And so I got an economics degree, and I'm like, you know what? What am I going to do with this? Tech is where it's at. And since I was a gamer at the time, I was like, you know what? I could play with computers and get paid more than using my economics degree. Why not?
That's a win-win right there.
It's a win-win, right? So I worked for a company for a year in tech. I learned the ropes. I learned how to manage servers and build networks and things of that nature. And then eventually, unfortunately, we had 9/11. And so when 9/11 came around, the entire economy imploded. And so my company, unfortunately, was significantly affected being in the tech sector. And we got about to the 6th round of layoffs. And I was like, you know what? I don't think I'm going to wait around for the 7th round.
Right.
So I actually pulled one of my buddies into my office and I said, hey, we're actually one of the only profitable segments of this company because we were doing IT infrastructure and support. People still need their computers hooked up and supported. And so I was like, what if we did this on our own? And so we literally did that. We basically left that company and we started our own company. Just a couple of guys had our, hands right into it. We didn't even have an office. We just started from the ground up. And so we were just very fortunate over the span of 10 years through a lot of trial and error and then getting into masterminds, talking to other people. We were able to grow that from San Diego. We had an office in Chicago, and we eventually exited about 10 years in and sold it off to a private equity company and then used that money to buy some real estate. So, in terms of purpose, I thought what I wanted was to just retire early and live the good life, so to speak. And to a certain extent, I did exactly that. And I'm very blessed that I was able to do that. And so part of that was a very conscious choice, was to go home and be able to be present with my family after exiting this company instead of going back and working in tech. And at that phase of my life, though, I also had to ask myself, okay, now that I'm here, what's next? And so back to talking about purpose, right? There's these different levels. And so what I really valued about our conversation last night was we talked about how as humans, we have all these different emotions. We have also these different thoughts, right? But are you truly your thoughts and are you truly your emotions? And if you take a step to pause, and listeners, you could do this many different ways. Meditation, you could do work, thinking, you could, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. Some people use supplements or whatever, but there's different ways that you can kind of extract yourself from your emotional presence and take that third party overview of like, oh, this is just fascinating. Why am I thinking this? Why am I feeling this? And what is the greater purpose of this? And so, similar to you, I believe things are on purpose. And Marla and I like to talk about that on the podcast Breakthrough Millionaire, that all of the things that have come into our lives, the things that seem like the toughest things and the most blessed things, they're all this immaculate, incredible puzzle of, it's like a tapestry. And so
Love that.
I think in different phases of our lives, it's identifying, okay, what's my purpose now? How can I help serve a greater good beyond ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally did exit the company, it stopped becoming about myself because I was like, I have pretty much everything that I want in terms of, human needs. What's next? And so what was next, ironically enough, was actually doing what I'm doing right now, which is talking to you guys on the microphone. I will tell you straight out, flat out right now, if you asked me 5 years ago, if I would ever go on a podcast, have my own podcast, let alone,
right,
or go on TV, God forbid,
right,
I would not have done that. I was definitely afraid of public speaking. I'm a naturally introverted individual, so I kind of kept it myself. But the problem was that I was keeping these gifts to myself and not sharing them with other people. And so that was my journey. That was my purpose, was to get outside of my own comfort zone so that I could share with other people.
Oh, there are like at least 12 different things, probably a baker's dozen. Let's just go with baker's dozen that I want to dive into within everything that you've just said. But I want to start with this. It's interesting because so often people are, and I'm going to speak on this tomorrow morning at my keynote. It's like people are chasing after a monetary currency, a financial status, and financial comfort zone. And they have that as that when I achieve this, and I always say repeatedly, just investor, you know this, like we don't need to wait. That is only one component of wealth. So what is that? That's an interesting dichotomy that a lot of people face. What truth would you speak into lives listening about the difference of, it's not just your money. And it's super fun. I love money. It solves problems. It's fun and it does a lot of good in the world, but that's only one element. So how were you able to shift past that and beyond that?
That's a great question. And, if I had to do it all over again, I think I would have definitely paused a little bit more, because during a certain phase when I'm building the business, right, I'm literally on the ground running. And sometimes life gets imbalanced and
80-hour weeks.
Yeah. Well, I never went 80 hours. Maybe like 56. I was always protective of my weekend time.
Nice.
However, yes, there's these kind of elements and these focuses where you kind of get stuck, and then maybe you don't pay enough attention to relationships, or maybe you don't pay attention to your health. And so I think if I go back now, and what I actually talk to people now is really building wealth, learning to use money as a tool, and then at the same time, building wealth across the board, right? Because if you don't have a body that can ultimately serve you and allow you to think and be present with people, then who cares how much money you have? Would you want to be a billionaire if you didn't have your eyesight and your hearing? Questions like that sometimes it's hard to think about that when you're younger. But as you get older, you start to see these things in hindsight. So one of the most important things that I did, Julie, was I definitely listened to mentors that were older than me. So I definitely there's one thing that I did well was I listened to people that had traveled the path. And so they gave me a lot of insights about what not to do so that I didn't necessarily have to make those mistakes myself.
That right there is absolute fire and power. I am the bottom. I have 3 older brothers. And so I always joke around that I just looked ahead, and they're really fantastic people. And we're all good kids and everything. But, you look to the people ahead of you and you say, okay, what worked? What didn't work? How did that work? But when we invite mentors to speak into our lives, it collapses timelines. It prevents us from facing trouble. And how did you find those mentors? Because that is a question a lot of people have. Being a natural extrovert and someone who loves, networking, connecting with people, I have a tendency to meet a lot of people, but, there are conscious investors that are still, trying to branch out, trying to find those mentors in their lives.
That's a fantastic question. And I will share from a perspective of an introvert, right? Because
yes.
I wasn't necessarily naturally inclined to go out there and just talk to everyone, right? Which can be a great advantage.
Will you be my mentor?
Yeah.
Will you be my mentor?
Because you'll find someone eventually. I think as an introvert, I was just very intentional. So I knew specifically kind of what my outcome was going to be. I knew I wanted to retire early. I knew I didn't want to have to be bound by money as my driver. I didn't want money to be my boss. So I knew that I wanted to figure out how to use money and leverage it for myself. So I had multiple mentors. So of course I had my uncles, right? But even then, even though they were my uncles, there's limited time to spend with them. So I started reading voraciously, right? Reading about personal finance, personal development at the same time, actually. And that was fundamental as well and part of the journey. And also going to conferences. I became a conference junkie and seminar junkie, and I would go to these places. I remember there was one specifically called I don't even know what it's called, but it was some sort of a wealth builders conference. And Donald Trump was speaking there. And at the time, he was
wow.
I think he was the most expensive per dollar rate speaker at the time, because they paid him $1 million to speak for like 15 minutes.
Wow.
And so this is a time when he was not necessarily a politician. He was more like a TV personality. So, he was doing The Apprentice and whatnot. So everyone's just like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. Sometimes you actually don't need to necessarily meet some of your mentors, right? Because if you get in proximity to them, if you get proximity to the material that they're putting out there, then you can start to absorb that. And one of the fascinating things that we actually talked about last night was we talked a little bit about artificial intelligence. So
fascinating.
As we go forward, listeners, think about this. You could literally have a conversation with the likeness of a specific mentor that you may want to talk to. Hey, if you want to talk to Robert Kiyosaki and ask him about his cash flow quadrant, you can have that conversation. And so, again, you don't necessarily have to have those direct relationships. It's nice if you do. But for me, it was a kind of a mixed bag of personal relationships, self-education, self-study, going to seminars, just listening to them speak, being in the same room, and then ultimately networking with other people that are of like mind.
Oh, I appreciate that. And reading is something that if I would have understood how exponentially it was going to transform my life. I was not a reader. I struggled with reading. And so, although I'm a writer, there's this discrepancy there. But there was always this discrepancy. And when I made a choice, when I committed to, I want to improve my life, and really it started with I'm going into real estate syndication versus single family homes. And I need to level up. As soon as I made that decision and committed and started reading quality books, asking people that I saw who were ahead of, and this is one of your little tips right now, conscious investor, is like, ask people that you see, that you respect, what are you reading? What are you reading right now? And bam, it goes in the Amazon cart and it's like on your doorstep in 2 seconds, and read it. I also switch between personal and professional development books. Because you're stretching, and I really appreciate personal finance, personal development books. I mean, because we want to be well-rounded. We can't just be, it's like lifting weights on the right side of your body, and that's it. It's like, okay, great. I'm glad you got like this bulging Arnold Schwarzenegger bicep over here, and the other side looks like Popeye. I'm not sure that worked out so great, but it's so important. I want to circle back now to something you said, because it was a really central part of the conversation last night about being able to be present and almost having that Matrix-like experience when Neo sees, and we didn't discuss this at dinner, but I think everybody probably had that moment where they saw the bullets just freeze and he picks one up and just everything falls. And really we can get to that point as people. When we find our purpose, this really ties into purpose. When we know what we're really aligned with, we can start to just see everything as building blocks and pieces. Let's elaborate on that a little more, and what comes to mind, and how does all of that resonate for you?
Yeah, what a great analogy of using the Matrix. It's such a great movie because, like you said, Neo, he essentially is able to freeze the moment in time, right? And then shift things around. And we actually have that same exact ability to do that. And yet most of us are sleepwalking around in life, not even realizing that we have this power to do that. And so again, there's different ways that you can access this, right? A lot of it comes from potentially deep work, personal development, but you can also do this through meditation. You can do this through, again, some people use supplements, or I don't particularly do that, but I like meditation. Meditation can get you into a very specific state where you can get outside of yourself, and then you can observe from a perspective that it's hard to explain, but you can get to a place where you can see how things are interconnected. And when you see how wonderful things are interconnected, then you can appreciate the here and now. You can appreciate the moment for what it is right here and now. I'm so blessed to be talking to you, Julie, about this. And it just lights me up to know that we can reach other people and share these ideas, because each one teach one. Right.
I love that expression.
It's just magical. And so when we can see that bigger picture, all of a sudden, no matter what happens in our lives, someone gets cancer, someone passes away, unfortunately, something happens to us, we can shift our own perspective on what that means. Right? We don't really have any control over anything in our life, right? I mean, an asteroid could literally fall out of the sky, come through the window, knock me in the head. So be it, right?
Yep.
However, we can always change the association of what something means. And so when we know that, it's not to say that we don't feel the human emotion. We're going to go through some stuff. We're going to have some trials and tribulations. We're going to have some challenges, right? And I'm no immune to that than anyone else. However, I can also take a step back and realize, okay, yeah, that was probably pretty uncomfortable, right? However, what else does this mean? I can say, okay, well, this is exercising that muscle. I needed to feel this pain so that when I meet someone else that has the same exact pain, I can give them the support and confidence. Hey, you're going to get through this. And this is why I went through the same exact thing.
It's so powerful. One of the things that we talked about last night was, and I have so many encounters with this, especially over the last 6 months, just because of some of the deep work I've done. And one of those experiences is, I was two experiences, but they both lead to the same spot. In Conscious Investor, you've heard me talk about, I was making a transition in one of my partnerships, and I just couldn't put it all together, but I didn't feel the urgency. I have to make a decision right now. I have to do this. I don't know. I just sat with all of this and I received it. And it was the coolest experience just to be like, I wonder what all of these feelings and emotions are showing up for. I wonder what they're going to lead and guide me to. I wonder what they're going to reveal. I wonder what this is all about, because there's always that flip side. Fear is great, actually. But when we associate it with something negative, because we've culturally said fear is bad, it's negative, we've given it this label, but it's actually there to serve and support us. And when we invite it in, I'm curious, we open up the gateway of opportunity to see ourselves in the situation in that more matrix-like way, where we can start to see oh, I see it now. And I like this part where it's we can accept something, but that doesn't mean that we like it or approve of it. But we have to have that deeper level of acceptance of this is what is.
That's so true. And it really comes down to the acceptance of knowing that, okay, this actually, even if I don't know what it means right now, we have the faith that it's going to mean something better for maybe not even me, but for someone else in our family, our friends, or someone that we don't know. And we may never actually know how it affects someone else, but if we have faith that we know that it did in some form or fashion, then all of a sudden you don't worry about, all the pain that you had to go through in order to get to that place. One of the, my most favorite things that Tony Robbins says is that life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. And when you adopt that belief, there's literally nothing that can go wrong in your life.
It really leads to a pretty magical life. I have adopted that for so many years, and it's amazing because when those challenges come, and if you are living a purpose-filled life, you will face the challenges along the way. That's okay. It's more like game. I view all of it now as a game. It's I know what I'm supposed to contribute in the world. So, okay, this just came up, but now instead of, oh, golly, a deer hit the car, or I'm trying to think of, just the random things, but you can have different types of fallout happen, but you start to see, okay, how is this happening for me? And we can't see the ripple effects. Just interestingly, going back to your origin story, right, of watching your uncles and seeing, okay, wait, what's different about their life than these other adults in my life? Is they had a ripple effect in your life. You never know what the greater effect is in the world around us. And so anything is not just for us, but kind of as you're, pointing out, it's for everybody.
It totally is. And I reflect back to our conversation last night and we were talking about kids, right? And so part of, I believe, our responsibility, of course, we're going to tell them what to do to a certain extent, but even more powerful is just how you show up, right? That's the ripple effect that I want to provide to my kids. Is not telling them to do this because you have to, because it's your responsibility, right? And lecturing them. But if you're setting the example by doing, by being present with them, then they get to become their own personality and also adopt maybe some of your values, just through osmosis is what I call it.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know that people specifically said, okay, it was more go to college, do things well in life. Is the general rhetoric that we're taught versus find your purpose, lean into your purpose, take your time to develop and cultivate that purpose. So let's just dive into that for just a brief moment and say, what advice would you give parents then on really freeing their kids to discovering their greater purpose?
That's a fantastic question. And I would say I was very blessed to have parents that allowed me to explore. As a child, I did get in a little bit of mischief. I almost burned down my house 3 times. Fire department wasn't happy with me a couple of occasions. But I was experimenting. I was going out there trying different things. And yes, granted, I did get in some trouble. My parents knew that I was exploring. And so they told me, okay, you don't have to be anything specifically. If you put your mind to it, you can be anything, right? What they didn't tell me is that you can't be everything, right? Although I'm still trying to explore that.
Okay. We'll go down that rabbit hole in a moment.
But what it comes down to is, I think for parents, and again, everyone has to find their own parenting style. But for me, I really want my own children that I believe, have very unique personalities. I want them to be able to tap into their God-given gifts and be able to express it in some form or fashion that helps other people. And I think the quicker you're able to do that and tap into that, the better your life becomes, because it's a self-serving mechanism in the sense that when you're out there helping other people, people are going to be back helping you. And so there's this value mechanism that just kind of goes round and round. And, I will admit though, when I was younger, I did get into this phase where I was very selfish and I was like, no, I just want to make money. I just want to make money. I want to, see how much money I can make. Right.
It's fun and it can be a game.
Yeah. And it can be a game. And it was a game, right? And that's not to say it's bad that you're doing that. However, there's other elements and there's other levels beyond that. And so be open to exploring beyond that. Money by itself is just a tool, right? So if you're a mean person, you're going to have more resources to be mean with. And if you're an incredible person like Julie, then you're going to have more resources to be incredible with. And so as parents, if we can help teach our kids how to manage their money, obviously our society doesn't teach about money. So that's one of my passions, is helping people to really understand financial freedom, financial independence, passive income, building assets early. And as youngsters and as kids, they have time on their side. So we can get them in that mindset. They're going to have more time to help build and help other people in their lives and really tap into, what their gifts are and explore. Part of it too is, I don't think you have to necessarily know your purpose instantly. Again, it's an exploration.
Okay, I view purpose, this is a fun way of viewing it. I view it as it is always evolving over life, and we cannot see so often in conversations with people, they want to know what the final outcome is and the exact steps to get there. And I find myself repeatedly say, we don't know what's up 3 blocks, 2 lefts and a right. Like, we just have to take the very first step ahead of us right now. That's all. If that's all we can see, and that's all we need to see, we just have to have faith to say, I'm going to take this step, and then it will reveal what the next step is and the subsequent step. And you might get to a crossroads. You'll know, oh, wait, I can see to the left. That doesn't look exactly like the path that aligns with my purpose. I am going to go to the right, or I'm going to stay straight, whatever direction is. And so it's really interesting. Oftentimes people are paralyzed. They're stuck because they want to see it all, instead of saying, my purpose will evolve before me. I just need to take the steps. So I'm going to lean back on your story and say, okay, well, I'm going to get this job. I'm going to go through school. I'm going to get engineering. I'm going to get this job. You're like following these steps, but it opens up the gateway, the opportunities, because of a willingness to lean into like that effect that was cast, that little, I love ripple effects in life, and like that your uncles clearly cast this ripple into your life. And it's like, you can just see how it all comes together for something so powerful. But I love what you're saying, how ultimately it's, wow, when we can have that financial freedom, we are able to say, wow, God's given me and hardwired and created me with all of these skills, talents, and abilities. And I've been responsible, and I've cultivated, owned, and developed them. And now, how much fun is this? It's just, life is a sandbox, and you never work again, never a day of your life.
Yes, it is a sandbox. It's a great.
Yeah, you like that on the tech side, don't you?
I do. It's a tech sandbox, just to play out listeners.
I cannot believe how fast this time has gone. I've already gone 2 minutes past, and I usually am such a good timekeeper. I could talk. I appreciate the conversation and would love to continue the conversation. So definitely on our time. What is, aside from Breakthrough Millionaire, what are other ways that, conscious investors can connect with you?
Yeah, if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me on my site called financiallyalert.com. And so this is a place that I teach people specifically how to learn about money, how to build the mindset of building financial wealth. And so I also wrote a book called the FIRE Planner, which stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And I will say retire early with a caveat, right? Because you want to retire early to something that creates more purpose, but it is one of these catchy terms that finance world likes. So it's called the FIRE Planner. So yeah, if you want to find out more, you can find that on Amazon or where I think Barnes & Noble has it as well. And yeah, I hope to talk to you soon.
Yes. And one more thing, you're launching a mastermind.
I am launching a mastermind.
Let's give a plug for the mastermind.
Sure. Yeah. So specifically, Dustin Heiner is the creator of this conference where we're recording here today at the Real Estate Wealth Builders Conference. And so Dustin and I are actually in a personal mastermind together. And it's just been phenomenal for us because it really allows us to lean on each other and this collective brain trust. So we thought, why don't we create a mastermind for other people and help facilitate this? He's got all these great people here at this conference.
Amazing people.
That's the idea, is to get all these great people into the room together so that they can build off each other, stay accountable together, and then ultimately take a lot of the energy from this conference and use it over time instead of just letting it dissipate, because there's that rubber band effect. You get super excited at a conference, you go back home, and then snap, you're back to reality. So a mastermind gives you that ability to constantly check in and be able to, just really share these ideas and take that into action. If you don't have any action, you're never going to get a result. So that's what the Wealth Builders Mastermind is all about. So if you want to find out more about that, you can go to wbmm.org.
Conscious Investor, you want to check that out. We were talking at the beginning of the podcast how important it is to have those people around you, those influences, the culture. It is absolutely because we are the 75 people that we hang out with all the time and going to be curating that inner circle. And I'm also going to put the asterisk. That doesn't mean you need to diss anybody else out of your life. You could accept people for where they are, and you might be that little pebble in their life casting a ripple effect. And so it's really important that it's going every direction, not just one direction serving you. This has been absolutely amazing, Michael. I appreciate your time. And conscious investors, until next time, live big, love bigger, and do great things.
What's the big deal about investing in apartments? Why is it better than investing in a slew of single-family homes? I've compiled a lot of information on why investing in a multifamily, also known as apartments, will help you reach your investment goals. Head over to 3keysinvestments.com and download the Why Invest in Multifamily guide today.